We have escaped from the fighting in our area. Old men, women and children were under attack. Charitable people granted us kitchen items, a makeshift tent and some mattresses. We basically sleep and shelter under the sky. We don't have bulgur or sugar. We don't have basic food.
For more on this, Amjad Yamin is a spokesperson for Save the Children Yemen, and he joins us now live from Amman. Thank you so much for joining us here on the News Hour. Now, the crisis in Yemen is horrifying, and a lot of factors just keep on adding to the turmoil there, leading to more and more suffering. Give us some insight into these circumstances that internally displaced people are forced to deal with there.
Thank you. Sadly, as you said, the situation is rightly horrifying. Across Yemen, there are more than 20 million people who are in dire need now of humanitarian assistance. And the situation in Marib and the continued fighting in and around the governorate and the city is putting more and more people at risk of exacerbating needs. For example, if you just look at the number of displaced people, Marib hosts more than 1 million now displaced families, some of whom have been displaced for since 2015, for 6-7 years now. And they don't know just what's going to happen to them tomorrow. And the other issue is we are not able to access them as we are able to access a lot of other areas in Yemen. So between the lack of proper funding that would allow us to access the level of needs and provide to the families what we can, proximity to fighting and their inability to reach markets themselves or feed themselves, and the continued fighting that puts their lives at risk, their situation couldn't possibly be worse.
What does the international community need to do in order for organizations like yours, or let's say for the World Food Program, to get access into places that are closed off like Marib?
We need them to prioritize the needs of the families. And right now, the conversation around Yemen is a lot more around the hostilities than the humanitarian needs, sadly. And we need them to increase their support. And while they've been particularly generous with us and with the people of Yemen, the level of need across the country remains so high that we still need a lot more funding. But that's sadly also not enough. We also need diplomatic effort to continue to ensure that civilians do not end up suffering the brunt of the conflict. Today, only 1 in 5 displaced families are being reached by humanitarian aid. And it's a combination of lack of access of humanitarian actors, lack of funding, but also proximity to the conflict. So we need to make sure that the priority of the international community is that the humanitarian aid is able to reach those who need it the most, and that families can able to themselves also access what they need. We cannot have the Yemenis continue to be dependent on humanitarian aid for years. And for that, food is particularly important, but it is just not enough. People need to be protected from the hostilities.
Let's talk about lack of funding. Organizations like yours have been hit by not being able to have as much as funding as they did before, let's say, the pandemic began, especially with crippling economies across the globe. How has Save the Children Yemen been affected by recent crippling economies and not being able to get sufficient funding?
It has an impact on everybody, and including us as well. Our funding for Yemen has decreased by about 30% in the last 2 years alone, even though sometimes the money itself could increase. But the level of need, when it increases further than the actual funding that we get for the country, that means more and more people are not getting the aid that they need. With the shrinking of global economies, many of the global donors possibly have a smaller amount of funding for Yemen or smaller amount of support to the humanitarian work that we have in Yemen. It naturally means that a lot of families are falling out of the aid they desperately need.
All right. Amjad Yamin, thank you so much for joining us here on Tier 2 World and sharing that insight with us.